Good morning, colleagues. My name is Slings Pimta. I've been the convener of 2 events around the role of black professionals in transforming the SA economy. With me are 2 of my colleagues, co-founders, but they will introduce themselves as we move into the session. The purpose of this session today, or this podcast, is twofold. From the 2 events we've held, we've received via LinkedIn feedback that we haven't been national going to the provinces. So people feel that they've actually missed out on the key things we've been discussing. So we thought we'll give you a little bit of a spice of what we normally talk about in the events that we have, so that at least if there's demand, we'll come to you wherever you are. The second level is, what are we then now, the next stage after the events we've held? Where we're going to take this to the next level, but I'll allow the colleagues to move to that. But in introducing then ourselves, I call myself a reformed accountant. I used to work at South African Weather Service. I was the CFO and also the GM commercial selling weather. Moved on to Deloitte Consulting and Solo Growth Consulting in finance. In 2020, I took a decision that my passion is more in personal development. Hence, I call myself a reformed accountant. I do, in my company, the name of my company is called Stockhold S. We do strategy facilitation, impact talks, executive coaching. We also do some project management work that we do across. And that's the offering I have. When I normally facilitate strategy sessions, I start just to get a sense from the colleagues to say, in the learning that you go through, already in the past year, I've learned so much already. To find out from the colleagues, is there anything profound that they've learned? I'll start in sharing mine, and then the colleagues, when they introduce themselves, they'll share that. So my colleague will introduce himself, and then we'll then go as well in terms of the learnings. We'll start.
My name is Paul Sirute. I'm an accountant, chartered accountant, yeah, I lead an organization for the last decade, which is a consulting practice called Kaho Solutions and Advisory. And in my other life, I also am quite involved in property through an investment vehicle called Kaho Investment Holdings.
Great, thanks, Lingsby. So my name is Deboho Mikhwe. I am an engineer by qualification. For the longest time by profession, I was an aviator. I ran airports for almost 20 years. Now I go by academic, consultant, as well as all-round advisor to quite a few people. That's me.
Sure. So, gentlemen, with all of us, there's growth and development that comes across. I'm going to ask you a question each. In the past year, what has been the most profound thing that you've learned and that has changed your life? And I'll start with mine quickly. Scooter Brown was being interviewed in this podcast, and he's the guy who launched the career for Justin Bieber. They asked him, does money make you happy? And the way he answered it, it changed it, because he said a lot of people who haven't made money yet, they get irritated because it's easy to say money doesn't bring happiness when you've made it. But he then says a lot of wealthy friends that he knows, they haven't reached the level of abundance because they haven't done the self-development work that they need to do. So what he finds that with money that he has, he's had the time and the privilege to be able to take 3 months there to say, let me work on my self-development. So in as much as money doesn't bring you happiness, but it gives you the opportunity and the time to be able to work on yourself. Obviously, it's better if you work on abundance from the beginning, being purpose-led. But if you happen on wealth before you actually reach the personal development and the abundance, you can still work on it while saving money. So money is useful, and I like the way he put it. I don't know if you want to share any.
Well, I mean, probably the most significant learnings for me, I mean, we spoke about this earlier to say that there is this pre-COVID and post-COVID life that we speak about often. And I think what the COVID period and post-COVID period has done is helped us to discover quite a lot about ourselves, because we had quite a lot of time to actually reflect. But I think from my perspective, in summary, Slingsby, is just to say there is an understated value in knowing where you find your peace. And for me, I think it is really in making sure that whatever it is that you expect of the environment, of other people, it has to be quite a realistic expectation. And I think if you fail to do that, you start to lose your peace, you become restless, and you start to almost border on the entitlement realm. So for me, peace has been one of the biggest discoveries in the last couple of years.
Thanks. No, I can see looking at you as well. You just came in looking peaceful. Over to you, Tebogo.
Thank you. So I don't think it's a truth I've learned in the last year, but it's a truth that I'm finding harder and harder to accept as I grow older, thinking that I know stuff.
Yeah.
But that one truth is, your perspective is not the truth. And nobody's perspective is the truth, because that perspective has a reference point, which is your lived experience. So when we have different perspectives, it doesn't mean mine is any righter than yours, but very often that's difficult to accept, because from a young age, you get rewarded for being right? In primary school, you get a gold star for being right. High school, valedictorian, all of these things. And so you start to believe that your perspective has to be right, and you want it to be right.
Yes.
And the older you get, especially with kids test you. They're like, why are we doing this? Because it's the right thing to do. And they challenge you. And so again, their perspective might be different. So it's just that it's a truth that is becoming harder and harder, funny enough, to accept as I age. But I also am getting to a point which is opposite of this, of just not really caring what other people think too much.
Yeah, that's peace that you find there. So, colleagues, I think from my side, I'm also grateful that when we started this journey, I remember quite well last year, October, so just about this time last year, we hosted our first event. And the event was about the role of black professionals in the economy. So I had gone to meet Tebogo in his offices just to talk about possible collaborations. As we were finishing the discussion, I thought, wow, actually, Tebogo could be the speaker in this event with the whole experience he's gone through managing boards, being in operations, to share with the colleagues who are attending the event, what role can we play individually as black professionals. And it made sense. Then we've had 2 events since then. The first one was in October last year. The other one was in July this year. Paul came to the first event. Afterwards, he was always in my case to say, what's next? Don't you have these ideas? And we thought maybe let him speak in the previous event. And now it's taken us to this point where at some point Tebogo will announce this. But just maybe to start to say, Tebogo, what made you say yes to be the speaker in the event? What attracted you to that topic?
So I think for me, I'm a great believer in that the universe sends you what you need at any kind of given time. What brought us together is you saw a clip of me speaking on LinkedIn, and for whatever reason, that clip got you to pick up the phone and talk to me for the first time, I don't know in how many years. And you came around and we had a chat. And with what you were saying and what you have been thinking, kind of triggered a thought in my mind that has always been in line with the kind of impact I'd like to have, which is really starting to believe that nobody else is going to help us. Right? We have got to do for ourselves. We've got to learn to be self-sufficient, but it's very difficult to do that if you don't think much of yourself, if you don't love yourself, if you don't think you're enough. And so those are the kind of thoughts that have been bubbling in my head over the last 10 years. And at the heart of it is really, how do we have a mindset of owning our communities and looking to be good community stewards instead of just, call it voting every 5 years. How do we own the spaces we live in? And that requires quite a bit of a mindset shift and a transformation for us.
So it's strange, though, actually, when you talk about the universe bringing what you need. I remember when we first talked, you talked about an example in the former Transkei, which is within the Eastern Cape, about how they were deliberate in setting up the university. And there was an old gentleman, Mr. Makubela, who used to be a Director General for Finance, who was instrumental in those deliberates. And then this year, I go to attend some family function in March, and guess who is sitting at the next table? It's him. And he's been sending me information and minutes from the meetings they had in how they took the decision. But maybe from your side, Paul, as well, you were quite busy that week, but you made sure you attended our first event. And then on the next one, by the time I was finishing asking you to speak, you were already saying yes. What attracted you to this?
Yeah, I think Slingsby, we all want to contribute differently. You know, there are people that share their experiences, which then enable others to get what they get from whatever it is you contribute as a learning, right? Based on the experience. Many people write books, many people do talks, and I think pretty much it was something I'd always wanted to do, is to share some of these experiences. And I'll give an example now, but it was at exactly that time that we had the conversation that I was ready to start the journey with like-minded people like yourselves. I think having worked as a black professional in corporates over a number of decades now. We're getting on in the years. You know, I think we have almost kind of like lived through a number of different phases of government or business, which are the environmental factors. We have met many different people who bring different strengths and contributions to the table. And during that period of time, we have had personal successes and we have also had failures as individuals, right? And when one looks at a lot of the things that happen and have the deepest impact in terms of a risk to one's career, for instance, I always make this example. Let's say we get empowered in terms of technical skills. We get empowered in terms of all sorts of things, except things such as personal mastery, because they go with your own personal journey and maturity. When you study what many leaders, what happens with many leaders that fail, and the impact of anything that falls within that realm of having to have failed to master your own self, the impact is devastating, and that's where careers end. So one of the things that I've always said that we also need to focus and not forget is making sure that people are ready for those growth journeys. The last point that I wanted to make is one that you will probably tease me about, but I find it very difficult as much as I try to ignore what happens in the macro environment. We talk about scenarios, and I think our colleague Xolelwa will get into it, I'm sure, in a future session, where we start to understand what is going on at a macro level, at a government level, at a business level, at an economy level. What is it that is going on? But I think we will all agree that not all is well.
Yeah.
And we've got a choice to go and retreat into our corners or be commentators and talk to the news. You know, and the news every day, you're talking back and you're frustrated. Or you could do just that little thing that could change a life, you know, and someone can learn from you. And I think that's exactly what attracted me to this journey, Slingsby.
Sure. Thanks for that. In fact, you remind me. So when we started with the first event, one of the things we talk about is that as black professionals, we underestimate our own power in the organizations we lead. We're waiting for government to save us. we're waiting for the private sector to come and save us. But I'm put in a serious position of decision-making power where I can change people's lives, and I don't see that. I was happy when we finished the first event. One lady who works in the SITAs, in the payments creditors division, came back and said the one thing she's going to take away from that, there are entrepreneurs who will benefit from her ensuring that their payments come early. But when we send out the invites, once we had confirmed the speakers for the first event, I then send out invites, and I think we were planning to charge people $350 per person to come to the event. I sent this to my previous boss, Sandile Kwala. He had been my previous boss at Deloitte, and then we started a company together called Solo Growth in 2018. When I sent the invite to him, I was not even thinking of sponsorships. And I think for me, it embodies what we are trying to do here. He then sent me a text back to say, my brother, why are you charging us? You know we don't like to pay for these things. How many people do you want to come in this? I can then sponsor each person based on the 350 you were charging them. And that's how we started to have the first event. And that's what we want to talk about, to say when we are put in these key decision makers, if I'm the CEO, I should be able, if I'm passionate about things like this, to be able to finance them and to promote them. I think then taking it back to you, Teboho, once you have these ideas, remember you kept on asking me, and sometimes it was, I would be agitated. You say, what's next after this? And I say, you know, this is what has been shown to me, is that we're doing this event. I don't know where we're taking it. And then there's a point after this last event, you said, you know what, let's have a meeting, let's talk. And you had some good ideas, which has led us to now. Maybe take us through to say, what next from here?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. So for me, I think the talks are a wonderful platform to launch, to start the journey of transforming consciousness and some kind of awareness in terms of what we're trying to do. So, but it has to inspire action from those that are part of these talks. It cannot be just things end there, in the sense that, oh, it was a lovely talk. So what part do we play in helping our communities to start to transform themselves into, again, having this view that it is up to them. It's not up to anybody else. And so when I did ask and did put pressure to say, but it cannot be just talks. It has to go a little bit beyond. You then challenged me to say, okay, big mouth, what then should it be? And I kind of thought about it, and I thought we probably need a more organized vehicle around primarily transforming mindsets, because I think none of the healing work has really been done with any particular focus for us who were previously oppressed, in terms of transforming mindsets from this country doesn't like us to this is our country. That is an underestimated transformation requirement in many respects. And so doing that work of transforming and then teaching people that solving problems is about organizing. So those are the two things. And also recognizing that what you're trying to transform is a system. Simplistic things don't work. You can't just say, well, if we just change this president to that president, the system is going to transform, because it won't. Right? So if you want to transform the system, the people who are part of the system have to transform the spaces they live in and have that attitude of ownership and stewardship and so on. So to encourage that, it cannot be just a talk. You have to go a little bit beyond just a talk. You have to have different channels of trying to transform that. So, I mean, some of the talks that we're talking about is teaching people about very successful black people that they might not know about, who have done good things in their communities, right? In fact, African Bank at the moment is putting together a booklet of black entrepreneurs from the early 1900s that we have never heard of. We remember the more recent entrepreneurs, the Ntate Maponyas, the Semu Tswenyanes, the Dr. Mutlanas, and all of such people. But the more prominent ones were typically not necessarily business people, but activists who were trying to destabilize the system. And not enough of the people that, you know, were keeping lives going during that period. So for me, the idea then, the thought was, so what do we become as an organization? We start with the talks, but there's a lot more to be done. There's a lot of research to be done. And I thought, this is not a thing for us. This is a thing that should belong to our community. And based on that thought process, we felt that a non-profit organization where people can gain some sort of affinity or membership is probably the right vehicle. Because whatever we think this thing can be or should be, it'll never be that, because other people are going to contribute to it. And so you've got to open it up and have other people come and join, influence the direction, say, look here, you didn't look here, there's a huge problem here, or there's a big opportunity over there. So that where we are now is, and you've just done the legwork, thank you, to register an actual non-profit organization. And we're in the process of getting a pre-conversation with like-minded people to just have a discussion about when we actually formally launch this NPO and the form it takes at the first instance. Because whatever ultimate form it takes won't be what it is at the beginning. But at least we can chart a path in terms of, we'll start here and work towards over there. And it will grow to be quite a big thing. I have no doubt about that. And it will be an inclusive thing. So those who are worried about being from other provinces, there'll certainly be an opportunity to engage with the NPO and to have an impact in terms of what it actually means.
Sure. No, thanks for that. In fact, even as we sit here now in this studio, similar to the work we're doing, I remember sometime last year, there's a gentleman called Steve Mululu who has transformed his life. He used to be a personal trainer at a gym I used to train in. At that gym where we were, Steve Mululu was the kind of personal trainer that only the rich could afford him, because he was so high in demand. But what he did quite well, if he saw you messing up on the training, even though he was not your personal trainer, he would come and teach you about form. And it then created a demand even with people like me, that the day I can afford him, I will probably go to him as a personal trainer. But he would then distribute the load to say, no, I'm too busy, move to this guy. He then formed his own gym called Stream Body Fitness. Beautiful gym it is. And then at some point this year, he came and invited me. He says, you know what, I've expanded. I want to create an entrepreneurial hub in Joburg, in Sunning Hill, where you used to have at the core building, you used to have the focus rooms for strategy session. He took over that whole session, and he had the foresight and vision to say that's what he wanted to do. He came, he called me, says, come and tour my facilities, and I was resistant to say, what does Steve want now? What am I going to do there? And I viewed the facilities. A week later, he said, he runs an event called Men of Honor, and he said, come and shoot this video to talk about personal development for men. And he's got the most wonderful facilities for podcasts, and he said, come and use and shoot this video. So when we were then planning to have the event in July, as Tebogo had talked about the universe, I thought, wow, maybe we can use Steve's premises to host the event. And he was kind enough to give it to us for free. And then he kept on insisting. He says, I've invested in the infrastructure for podcasts. It's not being used enough. Come to our place. We are now sitting at his offices enjoying. I can't even edit these things. We are in his offices shooting our first podcast in his premises. And we thank you for that, Steve. And people who are really interested to find out more about what Steve is doing can contact us, also him at Dream Body Fitness, to see what level they take it to. And it's part of what we are doing, to say, how do we help each other as professionals? Because he's also in the impact speaking space, but he was not jealous to come and say, I know Slingsby is my competition. He actually said, no, let's work together, which is a similar thing we did with Tebogo. Tebogo is a strategy facilitator, is probably, and I think he's a modest guy, but I can say in South Africa, I don't think there's anyone who comes close to him in understanding strategy. And we were and he's talked about how we collaborate, and he's given me some references of other work that I could do for coaching. And it's similar to Paul when running his own entity, Kaho Investments. He would partner with me both when I was at Deloitte and Solo Growth to say, here's opportunities, let's do it together. And that's why the universe brought us together now as like-minded people. But I want to go back maybe on one of the points you're saying, Tebogo. There's a lot of organization and specialist consultants focusing on diversity and inclusion. So one could come and pose the question to say, isn't this space like in your, using your consultant, your strategy terminology, red ocean than a blue ocean? Is it not already heavily contested? Do we want to play in this space? Are we not duplicating things that are being done for diversity and inclusion?
Look, for me, I come at this stuff maybe differently. So it's probably an unpopular view at the moment, but my view is that as black people, we need to transform from desiring inclusion, because that comes from a mindset of whatever's been built has already been built.
Yeah.
I want to be included in that. I want to be part of that, instead of saying, no, but let's not look to be included. Let's talk about expansion. How do you make the place bigger? How do you make the place better? And that sort of mindset. And it doesn't help that in the South African sense, for a lot of the more prominently financially successful black people, the example is that of inclusion, of being included in what was already built, instead of huge examples of people that have built on their own. So it doesn't help. But I do think we actually need to transform, to believe that you don't need anybody to build something, right? You rely on your own community and you organize around whatever it is that you need to build towards, instead of eyeing the horizon for where you can include yourself. Right? So for me, it's kind of like that. The DI space is competitive, but I don't think that work is not worth anything. It's good work to be done, because there's a consciousness shift that is needed through that kind of work, in terms of what we do, especially in the corporate space. There's a lot of mindset shifting that needs to happen from all parties, I guess. But there's a lot of unconscious bias that people need to be alerted to, and I think the DEI people kind of do that a lot. You know, but for me, it's about transforming who we believe we are. And once you believe you are enough, I don't think you're too curious about being included in other people's things. You're too busy trying to improve your space, your lot, and your own community.
No, thanks for that. So, Paul, I know when we started articles, the rest of us were excited that, sure, I can finally have a car, get a nice car that I probably can afford, so that I can go to the latest party. But already, for you, you were already investing in properties, and I remember some of us were staying, renting your property. And you had the foresight to invest in property quite early, while still an article clerk. I won't even ask how big is your property portfolio now, but for you, it made you an accountant with a difference how you viewed things. And even coming in, you being able to join us now as part of this NPO, it was quite exciting, because we understood the perspective you bring, both in terms of the thinking, the investment portion, but even also the networks that we're going to need to grow this. So how did you get into, quite early, into this real estate?
You know, I actually have a sense of bravery. You could have asked a whole lot of other questions, and you know, one of the things that you probably don't remember is that I even ventured into the restaurant ownership space. So I've tried a few things, you know, as an entrepreneur, and the biggest learnings, to be quite honest, have been from the failed ventures. You actually learn a whole lot. I could tell you about how to read a lease agreement and how to negotiate terms, because there are specific terms that you need to look at depending on which side of the desk you are. But those are the things that craft us and build us over a period of time. So you'll also remember that during articles, I think on a 2,500 rand salary, and we went over to Investec. We got ourselves the nice cards. I bought a car. And it was like a crazy thing. But I had figured at that particular point in time you'll remember, Slingsby, that if you did not have access to transport to get you to Atlanta,
Yes.
the chances are you'll sit in the office. So I figured the system out early on to say that for me to be able to survive this thing, you know, I'll have to push myself into a space that is uncomfortable. I can't afford the car, but I bought it. You know, and the rest is as they say, is history. Now, to just answer the question around property, I can't say I knew what I was doing. In fact, one of the things that I wish I had was the ability to plan beyond, you know, the many years. Because as my needs changed, I made some disposals and some acquisitions that were not correct. You know, and that is value that is lost completely. You know, but I'm in a much better space with the combination of experience that I have to actually take it to the next level right now. And there's some exciting ideas. But to be honest with you, at that young age, I just was trying.
That's good. I mean, you started early.
Yeah.
I'm trying now, and it's a painful process trying now. But also, colleagues, as you watch us and this, you'll be worried that we're talking about these exciting things, and it's graying, at least two graying men. I'm not sure what you're hiding in that. Ladies are not ladies are not represented. But in our group, in the NPO, there's 4 of us. There's a lady called Olelwa Kashekatia. She used to work for the Mistra think tank, but she's one of the ladies who was the program manager responsible for coming up with the scenarios, Njolamti scenarios, to say where South Africa is gonna be in the next few years. So the 4 of us, and I mean, I'm privileged that I've done my part in taking this to the event, really, and I think that's how far I go. It's the people now I'm sitting with, it's brilliant guys who have accomplished so many things. And I want to pose this question to you, Tebogo, is that a lot of ventures that people start, especially maybe people of the same color as us, you find that we start this exciting thing, and then afterwards our egos get in the way, and the thing doesn't move, and we don't focus on what we wanted to achieve. There's 4 of us who, in our own accords, we think we are strong enough in our thinking, we're brilliant enough. Don't you think, or how do you think we can avoid that challenge in growing this NPO? And I think if you also mention the name of the NPO and how it came about in answering that.
Yeah, so one of the things I learned recently, somebody gave me advice. It was years late in terms of when I started my own consulting practice. The advice was, when you start your organization, start it with a mindset already that it is a big corporate. It's a big organization. Be clear what resources are needed. Don't think you can do everything. So the idea of bootstrapping sounds romantic, but this person was saying to me, don't think that way. Think about what's required for this organization to not need you up front, and have those thoughts and be clear around those things, and you will then be exposed to conversations that help you to do that. You will be exposed to people that help you to do that, or partnerships that kind of help you to do that. So I think also the idea of a clear purpose in terms of what we're trying to do also helps us as the founders of this NPO, that it is bigger than each of us. It is bigger than just the 4 of us. It will be something way bigger than we can imagine at the moment, you know, years down the line. And so that also helps. Whereas when you own a company, you're always looking at what's the profitability, what's coming back to me, and all of these things. With an NPO, there isn't that mindset. It is for what it's for. And so for me, that's why I think the NPO itself is probably the right vehicle at the moment for what we're trying to do, because it does give you a sense of purpose. It does give you a sense of something bigger than yourself. So that helps. But also, it's not about the skills we bring to the table. It's about us building an organization. We can add our skills into the organization, but our skills won't be sufficient. And so we're going to require to talk to other people. And speaking about the name, so we debated a number of things around, because the talk started off as, how can black professionals, contribute towards an economically inclusive country. And that's been the conversation all along in terms of black professionals. We then talked about, but it's so hard to change or transform any system. And so the initial iteration of thought was, okay, we're going to be black professionals for systems change. So looking at things differently from the very linear approaches that you typically find. We want to encourage black professionals to think about strategic systems change and how to actually do that. And then the question was, "Hi, but all these professional bodies are going to ask, who are you, what are you doing in our space, and all of these sorts of things." And when we then broke it down to the core challenge in terms of what we're trying to do, we actually realized that a big part of our challenge as South Africans, and in particular black South Africans, is we're trying to overcome apathy.
Yeah.
There's an apathetic stance to how your community runs, how your country runs, and all of these different things, to the point where we think just voting once every 5 years is good enough. So we're not active.
Yeah.
So eventually we settled on the name for the NPO, which I think resonates with all of us, and I think with the few people that we've spoken to also resonates with them, and that is Black Leaders for Active Citizenship. And it just so happens that it forms a nice acronym, which is BLAC, B.L.A.C. So that's the position.
Sure, thanks for that. It's always good to understand where the names come from in this organization, because one of the things I'm passionate about is understanding behavior of people, but also understanding pattern recognition when people do certain things. And that's what we want to be able to communicate when we go in our outreach programs, be it work we do in behalf of the big foundations, create jobs, or go to the locations to unearth, because we believe that everybody out there has got a purpose that they can actually achieve in terms of what they're doing. But as we think towards closing, colleagues, is maybe one or two last points that you think you have in mind in contributing to this, and also to say, are we limiting this to a South African context? Because remember, the black mind and thought pattern, it might be we think the same, whether you're in America, the rest of Africa, in terms of what we do. What is our thoughts in terms of where, and Tebogo did indicate that this is bigger than us. So if it's bigger than us, where's the ambition going, where we could take this?
Well, the first point that we need to be clear about is, as much as the timing is suspicious, with the elections next year, this is not a conversation we are starting with a view of starting a political party. So that is not the big picture, definitely. But I think where we started was to acknowledge that the challenge is great, and as much as you can have all sorts of programs, you asked the question around the DI space to say, is it not saturated, something of that nature. But I think about how big the problem is, which is clearly articulated through the outcomes and where we are. I mean, one of the conversations that is being held now is around where we are with the NDP and in relation to 2030. Those signals have been there 5 years ago. One could have told you that we were going to miss, the deadlines and so forth. But it is about knowing and understanding that in the South African context, there is a lot of work to be done. That's probably the first thing. And I also like the view that says there is also work to be done beyond the borders of South Africa and taking a continent view. So being a Pan-Africanist organization with that mindset is also quite critical, because if you see the common thread of the limitations, you start to draw some similarities, and there is an opportunity for us to work beyond just the South African context. But I think for now there is an appreciation that there is quite a lot of work to be done at home.
Sure, definitely.
Yeah.
Tebogo, any views on that before we come to the final? We are mindful of time. We don't want to bombard. I think there's a lot of information we're sharing it, so we're going towards a close. And we're not like, the speakers at your wedding, and each time he speaks, as I come close to finishing, and the speech doesn't end.
Yeah.
Any maybe views on this?
Yeah, so I mean, if you think about it, the mindset of a formerly oppressed people, there's going to be similarities, no doubt.
Yes.
But I think, to Paul's point, you start where you are,
Yeah.
you do what you do, and you can share whatever improvements have come from the work that you do with the broader continent and the diaspora. So beyond the continent as well, because the challenges are kind of similar in many respects. And so there is absolutely no limitation, and the universe will take the vehicle wherever it needs to go. Will take the message to inspire those that need to hear the message and get inspired to take their own action. So, but in the spirit of improving where you are, this is where we start, right? And that's kind of the mindset at the moment.
Sure. As we close then in this, I'm going to ask you gentlemen one question each. And I want to emphasize that I always say we need to be intentional as people in whatever you do. When we get into this platform, there are many people who will be watching this, who also, we are business people in our own rights in what we're doing, who will be looking at us and say, oh, we like what Paul said, we like what Slingsby said, what does it do? How can we engage him in our business? So you need to, and our websites are available beyond what we're doing with the NPO. So we are available to talk about that. But the last question for each of you, and I'll start it off on your side, Tebogo as well, is that when I do the facilitation of the strategy session, I always ask the people engaged to say, we are so much risk management focused in our approach. We never think what success looks like. So we always say, what are the things to avoid? We don't say, if this is successful, what could it look like? So if you're sitting there 10 years time, not 10 years time, 50 years time with your grandchildren, 20 years time, and you're in there, you said, you know what, when we sat in this podcast in Steve's studios, this is exactly how I define success, and it looks like it, and you know the power of the word. So for you, both of you, what does success look like?
I think for me, did you say 50 years from now?
20, 30, you can choose.
Yeah, it's fine. So for me, I think, if you go in the South African context, if you go to a township or, my old home in Umtata or Transkei, and you ask people to give you examples of successful people, 10 out of 10 are people that aren't from that community.
Yeah.
Even if they are from that community, they're longer a part of that community. For me, success will be if we go to a community and people say, we ask people, give us a list of successful people that you are aware of and that you know they're successful, and at least half of those people, they can say, that person who lives in that house over there or around the corner over there, they're still part of the community because of their success.
Okay.
Right now, the mindset is, if I'm successful, I get out of my community.
Yes.
So if we can encourage people to be successful in their communities, with their communities, for me, that's it. There's nothing better than that for me. Yeah.
Sure. And for you, Paul?
Look, 20 years from now, I mean, I see a picture of a guy who is reflecting. He himself is extremely successful, and what do I mean by successful is that he has got a track record of implementation and impact that has impacted individuals and communities, right? Whatever it is, whether that person was a director general or is a company head or is a leader of a community-based organization. And that person then says, I was just going about an ordinary course of my career, a day in my career, doing exactly what I do day in, day out. And one day I saw a podcast, or I was attending a program, one of our programs, and this program changed my perspective this way. And the learnings that he then takes from the interventions or that we have put forward, then continue to get him to do what he ought to have done in the first place, which is not about self-empowerment, but being relevant to society, right? Being an example, having an impact and looking back. Now, this is 20 years down the line.
Yes, yes, yes.
The person is successful, not because I'm an individual, I have big fancy cars and big properties and all of that, but he's looking back and saying, do you see that road from here to there? We conceptualized it because we needed to link this community to that economic opportunity and look at the impact that it has had in that community. But I knew that I had to get my bum off the seat when I was triggered by a podcast that I saw. Something similar to that.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you for
very
your
much.
time in here. This won't be our last, it's our first,
you.
but it won't be our last. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
As we go out.